I think somebody had a question. Somebody raised their hand.
I have a question. It's Kathy
Okay.
Brenner. On the Juncus, so I've been using it too. Do you have any maintenance tips for me? Because I find that pretty much after the second year, it looks pretty bad.
Well,
Yeah, I've seen it.
Well, we would just do it. We would thin it. I think that's mostly it's just so clumped, but we were able to thin it and then propagate with it, and it kept it looking fairly nice.
I've seen it overused. I try to not use Juncus patterns because I've seen entire parking lots with just one plant,
Yeah,
Juncus
it spreads,
patterns,
yeah, and
because
it gets
it's
really
a purifying
big.
plant.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it just takes over the entire landscape. So I try to use like a combination of 2 or 3 different other plants. I'm trying to get away from using
Just
too much
use as a
because it's more,
monoculture.
yeah, and it's more of a commercial scale. I think there are like 2 sizes. There's like the elephant
dwarf
rush, the
Yeah, and
larger one,
dwarf one.
which you see in the parking lots. And then once they're for maintenance, they kind of lop off the heads and they look down to the ground. But
I think you're
I've not
talking about
used too much of it.
chondropetalum now.
Yeah. There are 2 of them. Chondropetalum is the more commercial scale one, but they look very similar.
But this Juncus, I'm still on the Juncus. When it gets all brown, do
Yeah.
you cut it down to the ground, or do you dig it up and plant the green part back into the soil?
I cut it down to the base
Okay.
and let it come back fresh and new. But I've also separated it and used it in other areas that I wasn't having very much luck growing hardly anything. Like you said, it does take over, but it will grow when other things will not grow. So
yes, exactly. But I was just wondering if there was a certain cultivar, but it's a maintenance issue because there's some sort of an elk. I can't remember the name, but there's a cultivar of the Juncus, and I was wondering if it's more well behaved or if it's just a bluer leaf.
Is that the deer rush? I've used that too in this project. We want to go back to that legend. You'll see the other plants I use. Highlighted some, but there is the deer brush, deer grass.
No, it was just we have a cultivar of Juncus available around here, and I wasn't sure if it was more of a dwarf or I hadn't investigated it, but I did notice that my Juncus patens kind of looked bad after 2 years in a residential garden, and I was wondering if I tell maintenance to split it in the fall, what would the best thing do? I don't want to do it in the spring because I think it'll just die in the summer.
Yeah,
Chondropetalum tectorum. I see that now. CH. You've used quite a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. The small Cape Rush. That's the dwarf one. Yeah. So you could use that version and not have that problem with the common one. I think I may have ended up switching that out too and just putting a few in there. But it's really what you want to do and how much maintenance the people really, if it's residential and they don't want to mess with it, then use another variety or cut it back. I've cut those back in the winter, like early spring, and they come back fine. How big is the area? What do you want to do in the area?
All right, this is another portion of the school.
Right. This is another part of it. And we really made it sort of a walking arboretum. It had some areas because there still was downspouts leading into these gardens. So we allowed that just to come through there and filter through and saturate the area with water from the roof. We removed the complete asphalt and concrete, and we used it as a demonstration garden by putting the pathway through it and some sitting areas so that the children could go out there and actually stand around while a teacher would be sitting and talking and giving a lesson. So there are several different plants that I used here. You can go back to the list, but I did use some Juncus here. I have to go back to my list and see exactly what it was on there. But
I think you used ribes, quite a lot of ribes.
Yeah, the Catalina plume, yes.
And
the carex. I used carex back again. Catalina plume, black sage. I used some hackberries, fuchsias. I used some irises, corbels. So I mixed some grasses, chaparral grasses, with some flowering irises. I used irises more closer to the water sources.
All right. And this is the rain barrel where they're
Yeah, that's the rain barrel to the right there, where they actually the downspouts came into there, and then you can see the bioswales as it's going through.
So what is
And
the difference between a bioswale and a rain garden?
A bioswale is mostly a water conveyance, and a rain garden can actually be a low sunken area that just saturates with water, or like a low area of your yard that just sits with water. And then you can even dig it out more to have that water hold in there. And you have to make sure that not just a bioswale with the cobbles running over it, but making sure that you have a sand or a gravel base so that it can actually go through there. A lot of the bioswales that we use, we actually had drainage systems with it, with pipes wrapped, filter fabric, gravel around it, and we used it to convey the water out of the site. Commercially, it allowed the civil engineers to reduce down on the pipe size for their civil engineering drainage systems. So we used, and I'll show you that in the next slides, where we used it largely in parking lots. This is in a residential setting. It was the first slide. This is where you're looking at that lower area of a yard that just doesn't grow things, because there's just, the grass doesn't grow. So took it out, dug it in a sunken spot like the first slide shows, allowing it to still have a low bottom and then a slope. And then we filled it with different types of soils, with sand and gravel, so it would filter it and drain it down. As you can see, there's also this drain right here. So if this got over too much water and was flooding, the water would go into the drain. Once it goes into the stormwater, it's cleansed, it's filtered, and it's helped solve the drainage issue that would be standing water all the time. This is Hollybrook in Houston, and it was an HISD school, LEED certified. We worked on gathering more LEED points by having these rain gardens and areas where the water would just drain into, from a parking lot, from a sidewalk. We had curb cuts. The garden right here to the right is actually an iris garden at the lowest point where it's draining. At the higher point, we use ornamental grasses. And oftentimes I did that. Is where the water was the highest, I'd use a water-loving plant that liked the wet feet. And as I went up in elevation, I used a more drier type of plant.
So our ornamental grasses, can they take, like, how much standing water can they take? Because usually I think of them as drought tolerant, like deer grass. I haven't used deer grass in like very low, typically not in the rain garden. I've used them like at mid slope, like on a slope, so that they don't have standing water.
Yeah, and that's how, as you can see, the lowest point where the water is draining has the irises. But the higher points, remember, this was not irrigated. So this was just water coming in from the sidewalks and curb cuts from the parking lot. Okay. So you have to be careful, 2 inches or 6 feet, 5 or 6 feet, you can use a different type of plant that will tolerate more droughts. So, I mean, you have all these little ecosystems all throughout. Hold on a minute.
So we're on the next one, the one showing, I think this is the parking lot plan.
Okay.
Can you see the iris and the fern, and you have a palette of like different types of ferns and irises. Have you used fern as part of a rain garden?
I have used fern as part of a rain garden. And I mean, I really love to use fern because it'll basically grow in a bog setting. And it tolerates different types of soils as well. So like I was saying, preparing the planting bed to not just be potting soil or bedding mix, but actually have layers where there's soil, sand, gravels, thicker a larger cobbled gravel to a smaller pebbled gravel down is that's, you have to prepare the beds differently than just a regular planting bed. The irises is pretty tolerant, and so is the ferns. They're very tolerant of pretty much any kind of condition you would put them in. I'm here right now in Louisiana, and the areas that have so much standing water just has irises and palmettos and fern just growing like crazy.
So the Boeing campus, you had two parts to it, the lily pond and the rain garden.
Yeah, and as you can see, I showed that as a contrast because both of those water areas were on that big site. It was a huge site, and that was a back area. So there was a lily pond with a concrete bottom to it, and it was highly maintained. People would come there weekly and try to keep the lilies thinned out and make sure the water wasn't contaminated and all kinds of things. And then I designed the one to the right, which was actually using the water coming down from a 4-story huge garage parking lot and coming down with these large copper downspouts. And I, brought those right into a rain garden bioswale. So it was the conveyance would come from the downspout to the actual bioswale, and then going into a little pond type of area, which was more of the rain garden, and it was sunken lower. And those plants were really water-loving plants. Those were
so the sunken part of these dark gray portions. Those are
that's
the
right.
Parts.
So it was
And what kind of plants? Yeah, what kind of plants did you use there?
I believe he's like a lot of irises, a lot of rushes.
Okay.
I think it was like equisetium, horsetail, cattails, those kind of things. Because
reeds.
Like really wet tolerant plants that you would find in a bogged area. And like, again, that was in Houston. So, they were used to having the equisetiums, the water cattails, that kind of thing. And that was like a little wetland or almost a little pond area. So it would be maybe 2 to 2.5 feet deep with different layers of soils coming up to the surface. And then it was a gravel type of mulch on the top of that as well.
Okay. And was this a LEED project? Was it a requirement for LEED?
That was a LEED project. The entire Bay Area complex there, the Boeing company, was the first of their buildings in their entire nationwide to become gold certified. And I was, forged that ahead with them, handled the complete landscape side of it, and obtained a lot of the landscaping, a lot of the points for the gold certification through the outside, through the landscaping. So it was a lot more economical than making huge changes to the building. So we were able to really bump it at that point from a different level to a gold level by really having a lot of sustainable landscape implementation practices. We also had a pest management practice there that we implemented for maintenance. Yeah. So we wouldn't allow any chemicals or that's really important too on any of these rain gardens, is that you just do not need to spray any chemicals on them also.
So did you do the maintenance as well, or was it just the design?
We did. We had a 4-year contract with Boeing to do the full maintenance and the landscaping services. I project managed that. Project managing allowed me to really have hands-on making sure that the plants had the proper care through the seasons, and it turned out to have the vision that I designed it to be, like the young lady was saying, how it gets out of hand. Well, having the maintenance contract really allowed me to keep those plants in a way where it grew to the vision that I wanted it to be, that I designed it to be, rather than out of control. So yeah. Natural doesn't mean no maintenance. Doesn't mean leave it alone. It just means you're having less maintenance, but you're still directing it to look a certain way and